Eli Tanners lived in a cabin that forgot how to echo. Each sound, the scrape of his boots, the hiss of a kettle, seemed to die before reaching the walls. He liked it that way. Noise was for men who hadn't burned their own lives down. Outside, the land waited. Pines leaned under the weight of early frost, and the ridges wore a thin shawl of fog. Somewhere in the valley, wolves called to one another, low, patient sounds that never hurried. Eli chopped wood until his hands bled again. He never wore gloves. Pain meant he was still here, still paying. A wind came from the east carrying the smell of dust and iron. Storm wind. He watched the horizon shift, clouds the color of gunmetal rolling fast. By dusk, rain began to whisper against the cabin roof, steady and thin as memory. He stoked the fire, poured coffee, and tried not to look at the rocking chair across from him. That's where she used to sit, his wife, wrapped in that old red quilt. The one now folded beneath his bed, still smelling faintly of smoke. Then it came, a sound swallowed by the storm at first. A cry, faint but sharp, like something torn open. Eli froze, cup halfway to his lips. Another cry, closer this time. A woman's voice, ragged and desperate. He stepped to the door, rifle in hand. The night outside flashed white with lightning, revealing something broken in the road, a wagon, maybe. And a figure crawling from it, blood mixing with rain. Eli dropped the cup. The silence of the cabin shattered as he stepped out into the storm. Rain blurred the world into gray streaks. Eli's boots sank into the mud as he ran, the wind flinging cold needles against his face. The wagon lay twisted in the ditch, one wheel still turning, creaking like an old prayer. A horse, its leg broken, thrashed weakly before going still. The smell of wet earth and blood filled the air. He saw her, half buried beneath a splintered plank, her hair dark with rain, lips blue. When he knelt, she flinched, a whisper of breath leaving her mouth. "Don't, let them find me." Her voice barely touched the storm. Eli pried the wood off her with his bare hands, splinters biting his palms. He lifted her carefully, feeling the weight of her not as flesh but as consequence. She was light, too light. Her dress torn, one boot missing. A chain around her neck caught the lightning, a small locket, dented, locked tight. The walk back felt endless. The storm pressed on his shoulders, and she trembled against him, every breath shallow, fading. By the time he pushed through his door, his coat dripped rivers onto the floorboards. He laid her by the fire, wrapped in that red quilt he hadn't touched in years. Her skin burned with fever. He poured whiskey over her cuts, hands trembling as she moaned but didn't wake. The fire snapped and hissed like it remembered something he didn't want to. When the worst of the wind passed, he sat beside her, hat still on his knee. Hours slid away. The storm eased into silence. Then she stirred, eyes fluttering open, catching the firelight. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. Her gaze drifted toward the door, frightened and far away. "I don't know." And for the first time in years, Eli didn't either. Morning found them in the hush after rain. Mist hung low over the ridge, drifting through the broken pines like smoke from some forgotten fire. Eli moved slow, careful not to wake her. He fed the stove, poured water into the tin basin, and tried to remember the rhythm of a life that had room for two. When she stirred beneath the quilt, he turned away, pretending to busy his hands with the kettle. She sat up slow, eyes tracing the cabin's rough walls, the rifle above the door, the single rocking chair. Her voice came soft. "You fixed me." He didn't answer. Just set a cup of water by her side and nodded. She drank, wincing. Her hands were small, scraped raw. The locket around her neck caught the firelight again, a flash of something too fine for the wild. Days bled into each other. She healed in pieces, sleep, fever, silence. Eli mended the wagon between chores, though he hadn't asked where she meant to go. Sometimes he'd find her standing at the window, staring toward the trail that vanished into fog. They spoke little. Words felt too heavy here. Instead, there were gestures, the way she folded the red quilt each morning, or how he'd leave coffee cooling near her elbow. Once, he caught her humming to herself, a tune so faint he almost doubted it was real. At night, he'd sit outside with his pipe, watching the lantern light move across the window. Something restless stirred in him again, the same way the earth does before a thaw. But one evening, while she slept, he found the letter she'd hidden beneath the floorboard, a wax seal scorched half away, bearing a crest he knew too well. He stood there long after the lamp went out, the paper shaking in his hand. The letter sat on the table between them the next morning, edges curling where his hands had wrung it through the night. She didn't speak at first. Her eyes found the seal, the broken mark of the marshal's office, and went still. The fire cracked once, sharp and accusing. Eli waited. He wasn't good at waiting, not when truth hung in the air like smoke. "You hid it," he said, voice low, steady as a man who'd already imagined the worst. Her fingers trembled on the cup. "Because I didn't want you to know." "Know what?" "That my husband was one of them." She swallowed hard, words cutting through the quiet like a knife through cloth. "A deputy, until he turned outlaw. They called him Wren." Eli's stomach turned cold. That name had followed him for years, through towns, through silence, through dreams of fire and screams. He'd thought it buried with the man he killed. "He was hunting you," she said softly. "Said you shot him without cause. But I found his journal after. The truth. He robbed that saloon. He killed those men. You stopped him." The air between them thinned. Outside, the thaw had begun, water dripping from the eaves in slow, rhythmic beats. Eli leaned forward, the sound of his breath rough. "And you? Why run?" Her eyes met his, wet, defiant, tired. "Because his name was mine. And the law doesn't care whose hands pull the trigger. They just come." Lightning flickered faintly beyond the hills, silent but close. He felt it, deep in his bones, the old life crawling back from the grave. She reached across the table, her hand small over his scarred one. "I never wanted to bring it here," she whispered. "You already did," he said, but he didn't pull away. By dusk, the first riders came down from the ridge. 3 silhouettes against a copper sky, slow, deliberate, the kind of men who didn't hurry unless they meant to end something. Eli saw them from the porch, hand resting on the rail, thumb brushing the scar in the wood where his rifle used to lean. Inside, she stood by the window, white-knuckled on the curtain edge. "Lawmen?" He nodded once. The horses clattered closer, hooves drumming through puddles, echoing through the hollow like a sentence being carried out. Sheriff Kett rode at the front, hat pulled low, rain glinting on his badge. His eyes found Eli's. They held there, 2 men with a history neither wanted spoken aloud. "Evenin', Tanner," the sheriff called, voice flat. "We're lookin' for a woman. Name of Clara Wren. Wanted for aiding a fugitive and obstruction of justice." Eli didn't move. "Ain't nobody here by that name." Kett's jaw tightened. "Don't do this, Eli." Behind him, thunder rolled over the ridge, slow and mean. Eli heard her breathing behind him, shallow, broken, the sound of someone cornered by fate. He stepped off the porch, mud sucking at his boots. "You already burned 1 life of mine," he said quietly. "You don't get to take the second." The sheriff looked past him toward the cabin window, where the fire flickered on her face. Regret flickered across his own. "You're shelterin' a ghost, Eli. And ghosts got a way of drownin' the livin'. Eli's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then I'll drown with her." The storm broke open, rain hammering down in sheets. The riders dismounted, hands near their holsters. Eli turned once toward the door, she stood there, shaking, holding his empty rifle. And in that moment, silence was louder than thunder. Rain washed the world into shadow and silver. The men stood in a half-circle, coats slick with water, eyes narrowing beneath their hats. Eli felt the weight of their stare and the rifleless emptiness of his hands. Behind him, the cabin door creaked, and he heard her step onto the porch, barefoot, trembling, the barrel of his old Winchester rising like a prayer she didn't know how to finish. "Stay inside," he said without turning. Her voice cracked. "They'll kill you." "Maybe." The sheriff's men shifted, uneasy. Ket's hand hovered over his holster but didn't draw. "Don't make me choose between the law and my conscience, Eli." Lightning flared, white, endless. For that brief second, Eli saw all of it frozen in the light, the sheriff's sorrow, the guns glinting like accusation, her hair plastered to her face as she tried not to cry. Then thunder came, and time moved again. Eli stepped off the porch and into the rain. "You'll have to shoot me in the back," he said. Ket's voice rose above the downpour. "You're protectin' a name, not a woman." Eli turned, eyes hard. "Her name's what made the world cruel to her. I ain't lettin' it do it again." The wind howled through the pines. A horse snorted. Then, one gunshot. Sharp, solitary. It cracked the night, echoed through the valley, and faded into rain. Ket's men froze. Eli still stood, the bullet buried in the mud a foot from his boot. The sheriff had fired wide. Slowly, Ket holstered his gun. "Ride east," he said to her. "Both of you. Before dawn." The rain softened, becoming something like forgiveness. She lowered the rifle, breath shaking. Eli looked at the sheriff one last time, nodded once, and took her hand. No words followed. The storm had already said everything. By dawn, the rain had gentled into mist. The trail east wound through stands of pine still dripping from the night's fury, the air clean with the scent of wet earth and smoke. Their horses moved slow, hooves muffled in the softened ground. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to measure between words. When they reached the ridge, Eli stopped to look back. Pine Hollow lay below them, his cabin just a dark smudge beside the creek, smoke rising from the chimney he'd built with his own penitent hands. Somewhere down there, Sheriff Ket would be saddling up, pretending not to see the tracks leading out of town. He turned toward her. The locket hung open now, swinging lightly against her throat, its photograph washed pale by years and rain. She touched it once, then let it fall. "There's no place I can go where his name doesn't follow," she said. Eli shook his head. "Then we'll make one." They rode until the valley opened wide and the first sunlight broke through the clouds, painting the hills in quiet gold. At a bend in the river, he stopped again, swung down, and gathered stones for a fire. She knelt beside him, wordless, feeding kindling into the pit until a small flame took, fragile, flickering, alive. They sat close, hands thawing over the light. His coat dripped onto the grass. Her head rested against his shoulder, heavy with exhaustion, but peaceful for the first time. The firelight caught his eyes, the same blue that once reflected nothing but ghosts. Now it held dawn. The world was still, save for the crackle of flame and the soft breath of wind through the reeds. For a long time, they didn't move. The silence, at last, was kind. Far off, the ridge of Pine Hollow blurred into gold. The past stayed behind. The smoke rose straight, steady, toward a sky that no longer wept.